this computer. This is our awesome YouTube channel. We have other videos that are a little harder to find, but if you go to just go into YouTube and search for proposal enhancement UGA, this will come up, and you can subscribe. Like and subscribe, as they say. So that's that. All right, so my name is Jake Moss, and I direct the Office for Proposal Enhancement at UGA. And with me is Becky Kirkland, who's a Proposal Development Officer. She's the other 100% time employee in UGA. We also have Alex at ISCO, who's not here, but is a 0.4 person. So we have 2.4 people in our office. The purpose, just real quick, the purpose of our office is primarily to help faculty with large, complex proposals, meaning multi-investigator, often multi-institution proposals that require a large amount of coordination and effort. But we also have pretty much carte blanche to help with other stuff as we have the capacity to do so. So we like to help people as much as we can with individual proposals, but we are very limited in our ability to do that. The way to get us to help you is to let us know as far in advance as possible, and I'm talking months, not even weeks, that you're going to be submitting, so that we can see whether we can fit you in. And then the level of service, the things that we can do are have expertise in especially NIH and NSF, but all kinds of grants. We have expertise in editing, in helping you to formulate the argument for funding, and all that kind of stuff. And you can see more on our website. Just go to Office of Research and you can find it, or just Google OPE UGA and it will come up. So this is we have these panel discussions, or used to have them in person with actual coffee, not virtual coffee, and actual treats, not virtual treats or BYO treats. But since COVID has kind of both made that a little harder, and also doing this via Zoom makes it accessible for people, all sorts of reasons, people who are having some COVID issues, for example, in their households, and so on and so forth. The other thing I should mention is that this is not a webinar format. This is a regular Zoom meeting format. So keep yourselves muted unless you need to talk. This is supposed to be a pretty informal sort of discussion. I've asked our panelists to, talk for a little bit about their experience in applying for their K01 award. And so we'll do that. We'll go through our 3 panelists and then basically open the floor for questions and informal discussion. If you feel that the need to interrupt with a question, that's fine. Just raise your hand or type it into the chat, and we'll be monitoring the chat for questions too. And then there will be the official question and answer period at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Danielle Lambert is an assistant professor in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics. She's interested in the intersection of health and social justice, especially in the South. Her research aims to identify innovative strategies to bridge barriers to care through technological solutions by incorporating novel digital tools into research methodologies and capitalizing on the pervasiveness of modern communication channels. Her K01 grant is titled A Double-Edged Sword: Imagining the Role of Technology in Perpetuating and Preventing Teen Dating Violence Among Sexual and Gender Minority Youth in the Deep South. And it ended this year. Jared Musa is an associate professor in the Center for Vaccines and Immunology and the Department of Infectious Diseases. His lab uses a wide range of structural and biological techniques, as well as translational approaches to study the interface between immunology and structural biology. In particular, he looks at antibody-antigen interactions to inform the design of next-generation vaccines and monoclonal antibody therapies. He is developing vaccines and human monoclonal antibody therapies for influenza, RSV, human metapneumovirus, and pneumococcal infection. And he has clearly put in a lot of these words to challenge my pronunciation ability. His K01 project, which ended this year, was titled Therapeutic Antibodies to Treat Pneumocystis Pneumonia in a Non-Human Primate Model of HIV Infection. And our third panelist is Emily Noble, who's an assistant professor in the Department of Nutritional Sciences in the College of Family and Consumer Sciences. She's the principal investigator of the Nutritional Neuroscience Lab at UGA. Her research uses rodent models to investigate how the brain regulates eating behaviors such as food impulsivity and binge eating, as well as the neural regulation of body weight and energy expenditure. Her research program also investigates the impact of diet and exercise on neural development and cognitive function. Her K01 project is entering its final year, and its title is Melanin Concentrating Hormone and the Neural Regulation of Feeding. And despite what I promised, I forgot to hit record. So now I'm hitting record. God. All right, so we didn't arrange who wanted to go first. So I'm gonna awkwardly ask for which of the three of you would like to start us off.
I don't mind going first.
Thanks, Emily.
So just a little bit about the K award process. I guess the first thing I would say is I initially was gonna, can you guys hear me okay? Okay. I was initially gonna apply for a K99. And generally when I apply for funding, it's through NIDDK. And somebody actually gave me the tip that NIDDK hates K99s. They only give out 2 a year. Not that they hate them, but their preference is to give more funding to K01 awards. And the same thing is true about like R21s and R03s, that NIDDK prefers to give more funding to R01s, to fund more R01s. So having a little bit of insider information or just talking to your program officer about whether it's a good idea to apply for that grant is a good first step. So like with the K award, so with NIDDK, they love to fund K01s. So that was the appropriate thing for me to be applying for. Excuse me, sorry. So I'm the one who has COVID issues in my house. So the next thing was putting together a team. So and identifying a research project that's outside of your, so in my case, I was a postdoc when I applied. University of Southern California, which is where I was, they promoted me to a research assistant professor because technically you're not eligible for a K01 as a postdoc. And so I actually worked with them. And they said, okay, we'll apply, we'll promote you because you're applying for this grant, which was really great. So you can't be a postdoc when you apply. So identifying a research area that was outside of my postdoc mentor's research area, but related enough that that it made sense. The mentorship team made sense. What else? Having an application that was successfully funded, and actually as many applications as you can. It's really tricky to kind of read. There's the instructions are really difficult to extract, I find, from the website. It's a lot, right? If you were to actually go through and read the manual word for word, or the instructions for how to apply word for word, I think it would be a lot more challenging. And also there tends to be like a recipe for these things. And so having people who have successfully funded K awards is a huge benefit. So I had a couple of people who had been successfully funded that were in my field, And I could kind of use their applications as a guide. Of course, totally different research area. So it's not like you're copying what they say. It's just using it as a guide to make sure that all the elements are incorporated. And then having a really good plan, similar to that part is similar to other grants. But what I was most surprised about is that the training aspect of the K award is actually really, really important to them. Like there were certain things that I didn't realize. For example, the first time I submitted, I didn't know I was supposed to have coursework as a part of my K award application. So I was like, wait, I'm done with school. Why do I need to have coursework in here? Well, it's really important. They want to see that you're still doing training. So adding, in my case, including like a statistics course, making sure that I have responsible conduct of research taken care of. Like you're supposed to have responsible conduct of research course that's in person once per stage, per career stage, or every 4 years. So, and that's a really big deal to them. So if you're thinking about applying, you might want to sign up for a responsible conduct of research course. And I actually talked to, because I recently, for my progress report, I realized that my 4 years are up and I need to register for responsible conduct of research again. And so I was like, hey, is there a course out there that's, for faculty members for responsible conduct of research? And the research office said, actually, you probably will need to apply or sign up for one of these graduate student courses, and maybe you can, help assist with teaching the course or something like that. But they don't have anything specifically for K award people, I guess. Let's see what else. Specific aims, making sure that I had my specific aims, that each aim is not dependent on the other aim, but that the aims are related to each other and work toward a common problem. The other thing is just in the writing, any tiny minor acknowledgement of any tiny acknowledgement that you have of well, I don't have experience in these techniques, which I included that language to kind of really highlight the fact that that this is something that I would need to be trained in. Somebody pulled that out as a weakness and said well, the PI doesn't have experience in these techniques. So just being really careful with your language and just being always really positive, I am the right person for this. I have all the experience that I need to do this. I'm going to be successful, and not having any kind of modesty, or, even you really have to be very strong in your language and very positive, because reviewers will pick up on that one tiny little thing that you say, and that will be listed as your weakness. So getting in the mindset of reading your own grant over again and being if I were a reviewer and I were tasked with finding criticisms, what would I look for? And usually it's the one thing that you're not sure about that's going to come back as a major criticism of your grant. I had one reviewer who proposed something that was a little bit, basically they wanted me to do electrophysiology, which is an entirely different research field. It would be it's a whole, that in and of itself is what people focus their whole career on. And they thought that was really appropriate for the research that I was trying to do. It was really appropriate to have that. And we pushed back on that and said, look, this is a training grant. That's a whole different type of training. It's not realistic to think that I'm going to get that experience as a part of this grant. And so we kind of pushed back on that, and maybe we're a little bit too strong in our language and pushing back against that. And that reviewer was not happy. And so they did not give me a good score the second time around. And the program officer and the program officer came back to me and said, listen, this is this one reviewer. Obviously it was a situation where, we don't necessarily agree or disagree, but we would like you to write something to address this comment. And so they gave me the opportunity to write something up that addressed that comment a little bit further after the fact. So I guess that was really the big thing with the resubmission. So I submitted twice. And let's see, what else am I forgetting? Yeah, making sure you have a really good identifying like a team of people who have different expertise where they can actually train you in something. One of the comments that I got dinged on was I didn't have external advisors. So I had to identify 3 external advisors. So having, in addition to your mentorship team, having other people who can write letters and say that they're going to help you in your career with networking or help advise you on certain techniques or that kind of thing is also really helpful. I don't know. It's a huge undertaking. So good for you if you're applying for a K award. And I'm happy to answer any questions, more specific questions that you have, or you're welcome to see my proposal.
Can I ask a quick follow-up on the process of resubmission? So when you say they let you address that question, did you address it in the introduction to the resubmission, or was it a separate?
No, so I submitted, and then I in the introduction to the resubmission, I pushed back and I said, like, this is ridiculous. And that reviewer was not happy with my pushing back. And I kind of knew, like, you know, I kind of knew it was not a good idea, but at the same time, it was like, I don't know, we just went for it and pushed back. And then after that, the program officer reached out and said, okay, like, we're not going to say we're going to give you the grant, but like, we want to give you an opportunity to address this. And basically, and that's the other thing, is just like, it's a little bit of a game. Like, I guess like any NIH grant, it's a little bit of a game of like, you never really know that you have the grant until you have the grant. I mean, unless you get like a perfect score. And so there's always like, oh, and this one more thing, and this one more thing. At least that's been my experience. So the program officer said, you know, you can write this page response to this one reviewer, which I did. And then they ended up giving me the grant. So I didn't have to resubmit again. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to, but yeah.
Yeah, so a quick plug. So the other thing I forgot to mention is that we are also really happy to help with the resubmission. And we can do that for pretty much anyone because it's a kind of a, you already have everything written. So it's a little less work for us, but we can help to determine whether and how to address reviewers' comments. Because it can be, you can, if you respond to everything in full, you can really sort of deform your proposal, and you don't want to be proposing something that if you get the award, you don't actually want to do. Like in your case, if you had acceded to their demand and been like, okay, we'll do electrophoresis, you might be stuck for a few years, you know, doing something that is not kind of outside your area of interest. Okay, so if people have questions, go ahead and raise your hand or type them into the chat. But otherwise, you know, we'll also have questions at the end. Jared, do you want to go next?
Sure.
Thanks, Emily.
So my K01 was, I actually applied for that a few months into being at UGA. Mine was, I think, probably more of a unique case. There's a specific K01 that's still available and been modified since I applied, but it's for junior faculty, so tenure track or non-tenure track, to gain experience in non-human primate models. So using them for that, there's some just for using non-human primate models, and there's some that are more tailored to using NHPs for HIV research. So coming into UGA, I didn't have any non-human primate experience. So my colleague here, Karen Norris, who probably some of you know, suggested that I apply to that, and we talked through it and came up with a good plan. And that was something I was interested in learning and getting training in. And it kind of requires, like, for new investigators to get into that field, because it costs so much money, it requires these sort of grants. Either you're already working under somebody who has lots of money to run these studies, or, you know, the benefit of this K was they kind of give you a good chunk of money to start running some of your own pilot studies. So I applied for that. So I started here in August, and I think I applied in December. So that was 2017. And then our score, I think it was like a 37 maybe, or somewhere in the 30s. And there's only a handful of people applying. So in that case, you know, after I talked to the program officer, we didn't have the chance for a resubmission, because these were kind of once a year grants that you can apply to. And in this case, I responded to critiques to the program officer directly. But at that point, I think it seemed like they were interested in funding it, and they just wanted to, you know, hear my plans before they did that. And I think that ended up getting funded in the summer of 2018. Jake, am I able to share a slide? Okay. I just wanted to pull up. Let me try this. Oh, okay. Well, actually, never mind. I can walk you through it. I have those security issues. Okay. So basically, what I wanted to show you was just sort of the, you know, and as the first speaker was mentioning about the training, and that's sort of the most important part, I would think, of a K01. So in my case, I had like experience in protein biochemistry, and I kind of laid this out in like my training plan, and I had training from a postdoc in virology, and then some like rodent models. And then the goal for the K that I set up was to focus on developing monoclonal antibodies for a fungal pathogen. So I hadn't worked with NHPs, as I mentioned, and I hadn't worked with this specific fungal pathogen, but my K01 mentor, Karen, who had experience in both of those, and then I was bringing sort of the monoclonal antibody side to it that I had previous training in the protein biochemistry. So that was sort of a nice mesh of like things that I could do and things that I was going to learn during the K01 period. But really, you know, when I set up my training plan, it basically, you know, scientifically, it was coming down to like, you know, learning an NHP model, actually running my specific aims for the research project, learning new skills, and trying to characterize immune cells from the animals, and kind of trying to plan these longer term, sometimes year-long animal studies. And then in terms of like career development that I proposed, it was kind of attending conferences more geared to the HIV field. This specific K01 actually had a conference we had to attend every year. So it was for the HIV Vaccine Trials Network. They have an early stage investigator conference every year. So as part of the conditions for the K01, you actually had to go to this conference, and that was really great. You know, there were some bigger names there presenting their own research, but we all had to do these like 5-minute flash talks. There were sort of these professional development sections, learning how to trying to plan a grant, you know, being able to ask questions to more senior investigators and things like that. And then that also allowed for some networking with other investigators, because a lot of them are probably going to end up being a reviewer on some grant you submit in the future. So it's always good to get to know as many people as possible, so at least they can put a name to your face. And then I think the first speaker already mentioned, like, I did propose academic coursework. So I did like a statistics course, I had RCR on there, I had an advanced immunology course. And then also I proposed some like improving my grant writing. So both through some of the resources available at UGA through like proposal enhancement, for example, but also like through like mentor guided skills. And then I will say also, like, having a plan for the future in your K is important. So you can talk about like your previous training, your training that you're going to complete in the K award period, but having like sort of a clear trajectory. So you know what you're going to work on in the K award period. And then after that, how are you going to use all of that data or all that experience to start applying for independent grants? And so, like, for example, my K01, and of course, you don't always know what grants you're going to get, so it doesn't work out perfectly, but it's nice to have sort of a plan. But for my K01, it was studying using non-human primate models to study opportunistic infections for HIV. And then now I have, I have some other like a couple other R1s that don't fall into that wheelhouse, but I have an R21 now that's focused on HIV. And then in most of the new R1s I'm applying to, we're having some non-human primate models in there. So you're kind of using all your previous experience. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but using all that experience to sort of move your career forward and apply. And, if you can like take your training out of the K award and spread it out into some different potential grants you can apply to, I think that's sort of the best route. And that's probably it. And, I had, and I'm just looking back at my grant, I had, like my committee members for my like 3-person faculty advisory committee. I got letters from all of them. I got letters from our associate dean for research. So it's always, it's never harmful to have lots of letters of support, especially from the institution who's going to be training you and investing a lot of money in you. And the NIH wants to do the same if you can submit a suitable grant. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Jared. If anyone has any immediate questions, feel free to pipe up. Otherwise, again, we can talk after Danielle. So Danielle, take it away.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle. I'm really glad that everybody could be here. So my experience was maybe a little different. So my K was funded through CDC, through the National Center for Injury Prevention and Control. So it goes through the same NIH processes. You just work more directly with CDC, and the K01 that I applied for and ended up getting was very specific to promoting new investigators moving into violence prevention research. So I really wanted to expand my research portfolio to include more work on violence prevention, but it can be really challenging with some other types of grant funding to make that the primary goal of the grant. So I had some violence prevention work that basically was kind of like couched in other work we did that was more focused on more like mental health or substance use. My background actually up until I got this K was mostly in HIV and reproductive health research. So kind of being able to focus more on violence prevention as the main outcomes was one of the reasons that I wanted to apply for this K through CDC. CDC typically doesn't do Ks, so it's a little, the Center for Injury Prevention is one of the only institutes at CDC that I think does Ks. So otherwise they tend to run through more of the NIH institutes. I just want to echo some of the things that other people have shared. Some things that were really helpful for me. It definitely was an undertaking. I was super lucky in that I did apply for a K as a postdoc as well. And I actually did my postdoc here at UGA, and the department and the college, I'm in the College of Public Health, were extremely supportive of me trying to pursue this K. And I had a lot of dedicated time as a postdoc just to work on it. There towards the end, I mean, I literally spent weeks just like in my office doing nothing else but working on this K01 proposal. It took a lot of time. And a lot of my mentors were really helpful in connecting me to people who had already successfully gotten Ks. So to echo Emily, seeing examples was really helpful. My faculty advisors set up meetings with people who had successfully gotten them before. So talking to people about like, okay, what did you do? What did you learn? What feedback did you get from the review panel was really helpful to try and prepare in advance. And some of the people who ended up being on my mentoring team actually had Ks in the past themselves. So that was really helpful because everybody, read my application several times and gave me feedback based on what they thought reviewers would say. So that was really helpful. And, just having that dedicated time to pull it all together. And actually just a shout out to UGA, the grant support at the college was fantastic. The grant officer that I worked with, like she reviewed everything. She caught some stuff that I left out. Like she had like line highlighted the notice for the grant and like was like, oh, you didn't do this correctly. They want it in this format. She had a lot of experience with other investigators who had CDC funding. And so she was really helpful. She was like, CDC is going to want it in this exact format. I can already tell you, you're probably going to get dinged for that. So you should redo it. And I did, and it was really, really helpful. So having people look it over and working with different institutes here at UGA was really helpful for me to be successful. I would say too, having a good mentoring team worked in my favor. I got a lot of comments about my mentoring, positive comments about my mentoring team. I have a bigger mentoring team maybe. So I have several people here at UGA, which was actually a requirement of the notice. So we had to have a certain number of people, and you have to designate, I had to designate a primary mentor who had to be at the same institution as me. So I couldn't have my primary mentor be somewhere else, and they couldn't move during the beginning of the K. They wanted us to like be in close proximity and be able to meet together. But I have several other people from other institutions, and I spent a lot of time in the training section talking about exactly what everybody was going to contribute to my professional development and training. And a lot of the reviewers pointed out how I mapped every person on my training team to my training aims and my research aims, and talked about why it was important that like every single person who was on the team needed to be there and what they were going to do and how they were all different from one another. So it was like very clear what everybody was going to do. And that was some feedback I had gotten from other people who had successfully gotten their K funded, was like spend a lot of time explaining things, even if it seems very obvious. I spent a lot of time in my research narrative as well, explaining things that either were unique to me. So I do a lot of technology research, and we did a lot of innovative tech-based methodologies. And I spent a lot of time like, we are sure we can do this. This is how we will do this. Here is graphs of how we can know we can do this. Here's prior budgets that prove we can afford to do this. So to some of the things the other panelists have said, we explicitly spelled out how sure we were that we could actually implement the grant that we were applying for, and we sure we had the expertise and the funding and the time to do that. And that was pointed out in my comments as well. So that was something that I spent a lot of extra time and had people review it before I submitted, and they, even other people were like, this seems obvious to you, but like you should spell this out more so that there is no way that reviewers can kind of poke holes and like, well, what if? And one reviewer even wrote like, it's very well justified. I just don't know anything about this, so I'm still skeptical, but I don't have any comments because like they pointed out exactly how it's going to be done. So I really can't say anything about it, but I hope it works out. So that was kind of one of the other things that I would really suggest. I didn't go through the review process. I was very shocked to get a perfect score on the first submission. So I didn't really have any comments, and it got funded right away. So that was really nice. That was really nice. And it's been a really great experience implementing it. The program officers at CDC have worked really closely with us. So there is a lot of kind of direct oversight. They're very interested in what we're doing. They're very interested in making sure we're like on time and that the K is going to turn into something else. So one of the things they were really interested in the application was hearing how our K would turn into an R01. So I had to spend some time talking about like how this data would lead to something else, what my plans were for that. And they've kind of followed up in all the yearly reports. We also have yearly meetings we go to and present like where we are, what we're doing, and we get to meet with the other K01 recipients, which has been really nice because basically all of us who got funded are doing some type of child or adolescent violence prevention. So getting to meet with other people who are doing similar work to myself was really nice. And other, the directors and the staff and scientific officers from the Injury Prevention Center come every year and kind of hear what we're doing, and they follow up, which has been kind of nice as well. My program officer actually even like sends me articles she finds that she thinks will be interesting. She sends me funding announcements. Like she's been really fantastic. So that's been a really great experience with my K as well. Trying to think what else would be really helpful. The training plan, I will say, I underestimated in the beginning when I started working on this. So many people told me, like, don't underestimate your training plan, to actually think about them as like 50-50. And I would say that that was really great advice, because actually most of the comments, the reviewers actually seem to spend more time focused on my training plan. So I had everything in there from responsible conduct of research, coursework, advanced statistical trainings. I had some additional like courses in terms of like how I'm moving into an area that's newer for me. Publications, dissemination. I had a whole section on like networking and professional development, and just like how my mentors were going to help me expand my own professional networks. And that seemed to be really well received. I actually ended up having a table in my training plan where I mapped every single piece of my training plan onto my research plan, and then mapped all of those onto everybody who was on my mentoring team. And every single reviewer was like, I wish I saw more tables like that. So if anybody's interested, I'm happy to share that. Someone else suggested it to me, and it was really great and helpful, because I just used that table the whole time I was writing to make sure that I was very clear about exactly what I was going to do. So I would also emphasize the training plan a lot. And just feasibility, making sure what you propose can be done in the time. That was something I heard from a lot of people, and then I ended up hearing from the reviewers as well. Is like, can you really do what you're saying you're going to do? I've gotten feedback on past grants that was like, it doesn't seem feasible, even if you think it's feasible. So that I paid a lot of attention to that as well. And happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. A lot of good stuff there. The principles that can be extrapolated to all of your grant writing. Okay, so initial question from Michael. Question for the panel. Emily mentioned that the K01 requires you to have research that is outside of the area of your current PI. Does that mean you're no longer a part of the lab? Can you not apply as a postdoc and must be as assistant professor? How do you convince your PI to support this? Do you do your current research and your funded research at the same time? Sorry for all the questions, he says.
I can speak to that. So technically, at least with the NIDDK one, you're supposed to not be a postdoc when you apply, or have plans to not be a postdoc. And that actually was really challenging. Some other people that I know at other institutions were able to get a letter from their department chair that said that they would be promoted, and that the promotion was not contingent upon receiving the award. I don't know whether they actually intended on promoting them or not, but my department chair wouldn't do that. So he was like, if you're going to apply for this grant, we have to actually promote you. And so I did. I was really fortunate that my PI was pretty well funded, and he was willing to kind of take a risk. So because often, especially in this climate, like, it can be really, finding a position is challenging, and it's very helpful if you have a K award, because they are, as other people have said, that NIH tends to be really supportive of K awardees. I know with ours, they earmark an R03 that is supposed to be designated for people who have gotten the K01. They're like, you get invited to the early career reviewer program. Like, they're very like interested in helping, they be like, the sense that I get is that they're invested in you, in your career, and they want to help you be successful. So unfortunately, like, it really helps if you have a supportive PI who who's willing to work with you on this. And then the other thing is, they want to see that your mentor has a long history, a track record of funding. So I got the K award at USC, and then I got the position here, and I had to find a mentor here that I basically had to add an additional mentor to the mentoring team when I was applying to transfer my grant here. And that person also had to have a long history of NIH funding, which ended up being a little bit more challenging because there aren't as many people here that are in my field that have a long history of NIH funding. So, so that is something also to be aware of, that, you know, that you need to have that person on your mentorship team. But yeah, some institutions are willing to kind of provide a letter and say, we're going to promote you. Like, if you get this award, we're going to support you. We're going to promote you. You're going to have a position. And other people might not, other universities might not be willing to do that.
So is your promotion contingent on getting that award, or did they have to promote you before you even submitted the proposal?
Well, so the letter, so at this other institution, and I know this is going on YouTube, so maybe I shouldn't say, well, I'm not going to say what the institution was, and this is all hearsay, but at this other institution, they wrote a letter that said, we're going to promote this person, and the promotion is not contingent on the award. I don't know whether they were going to really promote the person. At my institution, they didn't want to write that letter unless they were actually going to promote me. So they ended up actually promoting me between the first and the second submission. And so they were able to write a letter, and because at that point I was already a research assistant professor. So it was just I wasn't tenure track or anything. It was a promotion from postdoc to basically research scientist, research assistant professor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do any of other panelists want to chime in on that? If not, that's fine. And Michael, did we answer, were all of your questions answered, or did you want to follow up?
I will say too, if you do get a K, something to note is that most of the K mechanisms that I know of have a certain % effort you have to spend on your grant, which is much higher than usually what you would spend on other types of funding. The mechanism that I ended up applying to had had a higher threshold than what NIH typically requires, which is just something to note because I applied as a postdoc, and the mechanism I applied for allowed you to apply as a postdoc as long as you were pursuing faculty searches. So like you didn't have to have one to get it, but their goal was that funding these K01s would help you be successful in getting a tenure track job, which worked out for me. So that was helpful. But I did have to negotiate that because I had to commit to dedicating so much research effort to my K01 throughout the funding for the K01. And so that was just something I didn't quite know in advance, like how to negotiate that coming into UGA, which typically has a different, at least in the college I work in, has a different teaching research load than what was required of the K.
Yeah, it was the same for me. So in our department, it's, you know, 50% teaching, 50% research for everyone across the, like for anyone who has a research appointment, they don't go higher than that usually. But in coming in, the requirement of my K is 75% research. And so I had to basically get them to put that in my letter that said, you know, for the duration of the K award, I'll be 75% research, 25% teaching.
I had to do the same thing. And the course, I was allowed to teach one course a year, which was what CDC would allow. The course needed to be relevant to my grant. So that was another thing they wanted to see too, was like some type of connection so that they felt like that instructional time was still connected to my training plan. So that was another thing that I had to work into my contract as well.
Thank you. Other questions for our panelists? Feel free to either just unmute yourself or type it into the chat.
We have one from Carolina. How many people did you have on your mentoring team? That's what I was wondering. But besides specific research experience, what roles did they fill on your team? Did you have problems if you indicated that some of your training was to be provided by someone outside your current institution?
I can maybe jump in. That's okay. So on my specific mentoring team for that my K actually required kind of like a basic research mentor and then also like a clinical mentor. So someone who's like an MD. So the idea is you can like translate the findings to the clinic at some point. So they want you to sort of bridge the gap. So the like mentoring. So basically I had like a 2-person mentoring team, but then within the grant, I specified as some of the other, as the other panelists mentioned, like your the roles of other people on your mentoring team and the relevance of them to your project. So I had some people that work on viruses, some people that are immunologists. So it's all kind of relevant to the grant award. And then also, and like I said, so it kind of turned into like this kind of 5 to 6 person mentoring team, although I had like a single mentor here at UGA, and then the clinical mentor was outside UGA. But everybody else was sort of internal here, except for that one person. But then I also had like letters from our department head and our center director, who would also be like providing mentoring as well, like documented in their letter. And I think that was really important, as I mentioned before, to make sure you have like to make sure it's clear everybody has a role and they're all just relevant. You don't want to just like add a lot of names to the grant and no one knows what they're there for. But to make it clear, like you have this mentoring team, the role of each person, and to make sure that they fill in the gaps, especially training gaps, whether it's, you know, mentoring other students and mentoring your own students, grant writing, specific research techniques, or just research concepts in your field. And that's it.
Go ahead. Emily. So, go ahead.
I had 3 I had 3 mentors on my team. And I kind of just in general, I like with the 3 aims of a grant, the first one for me is always like usually really safe. It's just sort of expanding the behavior to something that's very, very likely to work and is really well supported by preliminary data and that kind of thing. And for that one, I had my postdoc mentor as like the mentoring me in those techniques. The second one is a little bit more exploratory and you know, descriptive. So in this case, so for my first aim, it was, you know, behavior that was adding. And the other thing is having a lot of preliminary data helps. The second one was like, okay, now I'm going to do some neuroanatomy. So we're going to find out like, what are the pathways that are involved in this whole thing? It was a little more exploratory. And I had another investigator from USC who's like super well, just kind of famous for neuroanatomy. So it didn't matter. I mean, my postdoc mentor also did a lot of neuroanatomy, but this guy was like the guy for neuroanatomy. And then the third aim is like totally different, never done this kind of thing before, like way outside the box and the most risky. And for that one, I had another mentor. That mentor was also at USC. But I didn't particularly, I hadn't had as much of a connection, working relationship with that mentor. Like I didn't necessarily have evidence of funding with that person. So I guess in general, like the theme that I went with is like first aim, really safe mentor. Second aim, evidence of working with this mentor. Third aim, totally new, totally different, outside the box, riskier. They actually didn't like the third aim as much as the other 2. So maybe it's not smart to take risks, but they were all at the same institution. But I don't think you have to have mentors at the same institution because they were perfectly happy for me to take the grant to another institution and say, okay, now I'm going to work with these people from afar. I just had to have really detailed, like Danielle was saying earlier, I just had to have like really detailed information about how I was going to interact with these mentors and when, and then be very, very consistent, like throughout the grant, like, you know, we're going to have meetings once a month. And like, if you say once a month here, make sure you say once a month here and once a month here and once a month here, you know, or we're going to, every other week, we're going to Zoom and, you know, like make it clear that you actually do have a plan to communicate with these people and work with these people, and that you're not just tagging them on there to try to get you the money.
And I have 5. My grant's actually in a no-cost extension, so I'm still working on it, but I have 5 mentors from 3 different institutions on mine. Several here from UGA, but they're in different colleges or different departments, because each brought something a little different. And then I have some people on my team from outside. And I just specifically specified to what Emily said, like very specifically how often I was going to meet with everybody and how. And so I talked about for outside people, something of benefit was that my 2 outside people who were at totally different institutions that aren't close, we had an established working relationship. So I talked about that and like how this wouldn't be new for us. And we already had, evidence of papers and projects together for a couple of years. So I talked about that. I also spent time talking about how the group was going to work together. And I actually got positive comments on that in my review. So I spent time connecting like how people on my team had worked with one another and how they'd all worked with me. And so even people who didn't know, some of them didn't know each other, but like everybody was connected to each other in some way. And we talked about how we were going to like meet quarterly as a team to make sure everybody was on the same page, and everybody wrote that in their letters of support too. So connecting things across the board, like connecting the research to the training and then to the letters of support. I also had letters to what Jared said. I had a letter from the dean of the college that I'm in, and I also had a letter from the associate dean of research within my college, and there was comments from the reviewers about how they appreciated that too.
And so you made sure, so one of the things you do in a proposal is make claims of what's going to happen. And so you had a very clear plan for how your mentors would coordinate. And so did you, I'm guessing, made a lot of effort to get them all on the same page and run all of that by them to make sure that they were really buying in, and that once you got the award, that was actually going to happen.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on that, and actually like interpersonal coordination has been like a huge part of my K that's not really on paper, but it's worked out really well. My experience, like I said, has been great. My team has been fantastic. Like we said, we were going to do quarterly meetings and everyone did, and everyone showed up. It was great. And that sometimes I was kind of like, everyone's busy. I don't know if this is going to work out, but everybody's been really responsive. And I think putting the time in on the front end, like I was very clear about what I was asking from people. And if you can't do that, I totally understand. We like really mapped it out on the front end. So, and everybody kind of responded and was like, okay, so your ask of me is this. And I was like, yeah, are you good with that? Can you do that? And CDC has followed up pretty specifically. Like they really did. They took the sections of my grant and put it in my progress reports every year, and we like fill out whether or not we're actually doing that. So to some extent, they like pretty specifically follow up on what we're doing.
Sean, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have maybe kind of a related question. So Emily, you mentioned having external advisors. It sounded like we're not on your mentorship team. Can you talk a little bit more about who those people are and what they provided? And were they people you already knew, like existing collaborators, or did you find new people?
So initially I did not have any external advisors, and one of the reviewers commented on that and said that was a weakness, that lack of external advisors. And so then for the resubmission, I solicited 3 letters from, and I didn't know like that was something that they were looking for initially going into it. So I reached out to, it was 3 people that I knew that are in my field, that are really well connected, that are just people that are supportive, that I've met at conferences and that kind of thing. I go like I go to a conference that's pretty small, a couple of conferences that are pretty small and see the same people over and over again. And so they're those people that are kind of in your field, but maybe they're not necessarily, they don't have a specific role in the project, but they just wrote these letters of support that just are like, yeah, I'm gonna, introduce Emily to people at these conferences. I'm going to, help support her when she's writing her first R01. Like they kind of, that's the kind of stuff that they put in their letter. So it wasn't like that they were specifically involved in the grant or the training plan, but they were expressing that they're supportive of me in this career path, and that they're going to be out there kind of, cheering me on from, I guess.
Right, okay, that's helpful, thanks.
Honestly, like I want to see Danielle's grant.
Me too.
I would recommend do what she did, because my grant was, those were a lot of the comments that people had was, the specificity of meeting with the mentoring team, just spending a lot of time really working out the details of exactly how you're going to be trained, and then exactly like how that's going to translate to an R01, which is where they want to see you go eventually.
Yeah, I'm happy to share or talk with people it was a total shock. I'm not lying, y'all. When I said my primary mentor called, she was freaking out. And I was like, I think it's a typo. And she was like, no, I don't think it is. And I was like, are we sure? Can we email someone? Like, I don't know that this is right. Like it was, it was very shocked. The program officer ended up meeting with me and was like, yeah, no one gets perfect scores the first time. So like this was rare for us. But I just attribute that to like I'm really thankful that a lot of people helped me and a lot of people shared stuff with me. And like, I had a really great group that really wanted to see this get funded. And again, that dedicated time. Now, like having the other grants that I do now and trying to write this now, I don't think it would go the same way it did if I didn't have that like carved out time. So I recognize like that privilege that I had to pull that together at that time and have a great team that was really supportive.
So you carved out time, you started very early, I'm guessing. And you got multiple.
The grant came out with a really short notice, which is also
Okay.
why I carved out a lot of time, because the group was like, it's only a 3-month turnaround. You have to kind of clear your plate. So it was really fast, but I think more people helped chipped in because of that. Like it was very quick. And so a lot of people were like, let's help you do this. But sorry, go ahead.
So did you have like a draft ready, though fairly early, for them to provide feedback on? And they were willing to do that on a pretty short turnaround?
Yeah, everybody was really upfront, like, hey, if you can get this to me, I'll look over it. Not everybody looked over everything. My primary mentor, who was my postdoc advisor, who I still work very closely with, she did help me read everything, and the grants office read I had people that helped. My mentoring team read my research narrative and my training aims, and then they left the rest. Like once we all agreed on that, then they left the rest of it to me. And that was really, people had really helpful comments. So I definitely recommend, if your team will read all of your stuff. Several people on my mentoring team are highly productive. One member is among the top 1% of publishing researchers in the sits on lots of grant reviews. So they had a lot of really helpful comments that I didn't know at the time. I would have never known. And they were like, yeah, they're going to ding you on this. You need to change this. You don't want to say this. So that was really helpful.
Other questions?
I have a question. So my the K that I am planning to write is a lot of the mentors would be from kind of outside my field, because kind of part of the goal is to kind of blend more of a public health and family science kind of perspective. So I don't know, any thoughts on what that would be and how, whether the primary mentor should be someone who's kind of within my specific field, whether that would kind of matter.
I'm not, so I do know that they like to see, at least in my field, they like to see that you have a track record of working together on some aspect of the team, on some level. So I wouldn't necessarily, I don't know what would happen if you had all of your mentorship team as people that you've never worked with before. I think it probably would be helpful to have at least one mentor that you have evidence of working with in the past. Yeah.
I guess maybe to clarify, there are people that I've worked with before. They're people kind of in my postdoc is sort of in a different field from my PhD. And so if I were to kind of go back to the fields that my PhD was in, a lot of my mentors would be kind of in the field of my postdoc. So it's a little bit different.
I think as long as you can make a good argument, so much of grant writing I've learned is just like persuasion and like it's literally marketing. So if you can make a good case for it, you know, you're selling a story. And so like you're just convincing reviewers that it's going to work out and giving them evidence of why it's going to work out. And so if like you can talk about how they're going to contribute to the team and contribute to your development and going to make the grant successful, I agree with Emily, like having some connections or like that you've worked with them, but even if they're not in the field, I mean, like I have a digital security expert, like I'm just like some people who just, I needed them, but they're not like necessarily in the same fields. I have a health communication person, like, so lots of people in different fields and different areas. But they all contributed something and were important. And I think that was what mattered.
Thank you. Yeah.
I will say though, that, I mean, they do also like, they want to see that your mentorship team are people who are like really established and really like, it's important to have those people that are in the top 1% of publishing in their field or whatever. If you can find those people to be on your grant, that reviewers love seeing that. So.
I think people are having to leave for other meetings, so I wanted to mention a couple things. So as I mentioned in the chat, we have a lot of resources on our website that are just available for use in terms of timelines and checklists and templates for various proposal parts. I'm also planning on having a K01 workshop at some point in the spring. That'll be, you know, sort of comprehensive. Here's how you do all of the bits and parts of this. And so if for people who aren't signed up, there is a newsletter called Research Insights where we publish future workshops. You can also just go to our website every so often. And there's another email listserv called Large Grants and Limited Submissions where we also, so you can go to the Office of Research website to sign up for those newsletters if you are on there, aren't on there yet. A couple observations I wanted to make are that these K01 opportunities all seem to have pretty different takes on what a K01 is and what the institute or center wants in terms of applications. So it's very important to read the RFA or the PA closely. And then also it seems like talking to the program officer is especially important. So some of the questions that people have raised, those are great questions for a program officer, and they're there to help, although they will have various levels of responsiveness. But I think that's really important. I don't know if any of the panelists want to speak to how how your interactions with the program officer went, or how important that was in terms of developing your proposal.
I can say really quickly, and then Emily and Jared jump in. I 100% encourage you to talk to your program officer, because they had a couple webinars and I went to them and like I got to ask them questions, and they were willing to kind of like review ideas. They won't give you direct feedback, like they have limitations in how much they can tell you, but I asked them about an idea and they 100% that I was originally had specific aims, was working on it. And they straight out were like, we wouldn't fund this. We're not interested in this, which was really helpful, because then I totally pivoted to the grant that I did get funded. And I would have wasted so much time and energy, because they were like, we wouldn't have been interested in this topic at all. So just, I've done that a couple of times now with other grants too, and it's been so helpful. And I was really nervous to do that at first, but I definitely recommend asking. And the worst thing they can say is that no, or they can't comment. But they have an idea of kind of what they want to fund.
I wish that I would have talked to my program officer more before applying. I don't know, like, I don't think I fully understood what their role is or what their job is. And I think I don't know, but in retrospect now, I'm like, that's the first thing I do if I want to apply for something, is I talk to the program officer, because it can save you a lot of time.
So I'm going to ask a question on behalf of some postdocs. What if you don't know who your program officer is? If you're just in the earliest part of this process and maybe you haven't applied for something before, who is your program officer if you don't know already who your program officer is?
I think it usually lists it on the RFA, your contact.
Okay.
Not specific to my K, but for another grant that I didn't know. And I actually workshopped it to a couple institutes at NIH to see if they'd be interested. And I just actually my faculty advisor at the time helped me, but I just reached out to their general info. They have a lot of the institutes have just for help, and they actually routed me to a PO that would likely be in line. So I ended up kind of going through a couple of people, but then set up a meeting, and that person was so helpful. So that's another potential strategy, is I just looked through the institutes I thought might be interested and contacted their help email.
Yeah, I mean, not to get too weird about it, but they in general, they want to help you. They want to get the best research they can funded. They have to justify their existence to Congress, and who will occasionally scrutinize stuff. So they want everyone to be successful. And in a way, we do sort of pay their salaries, so they are there. They are there to help. So don't be shy, or work to overcome that shyness in terms of reaching out, even if you do have to go through a couple steps to find the right person who can give you the best advice, and who is disposed to be helpful, because of course people are all different, and not every program officer at every agency is going to be super communicative or forthcoming. So, but finding that person is very much worth doing, because it can, as Danielle was saying, it can really prevent you from spending a lot of time and frustration on an application that ultimately is not rejected necessarily because it doesn't have value, but it's just not what they're looking for that program. You don't want that kind of misalignment. Okay, so I want to thank all of our panelists for.
Can I make one more quick shout out?
Yeah.
So for those of you postdocs who don't know me, I'm Shelley Hooks. I'm the director of the Office of Postdoc Affairs. All of these events that Jake is talking about, the upcoming workshop, that will be in your postdoc newsletter. It'll be on our website. Make sure you're staying in touch with those. And then the other thing I'll point out is that I also help facilitate research scientist appointments. So if you are in a postdoc position, you have questions about if it's necessary for you to be moved into a research scientist, non-tenure track faculty position, if your PI, your department wants to talk to us about what that looks like, what's required, feel free to reach out to us and we can help with that part of it too.
That's really good to know. And for those of you who aren't actually here, but will be watching this in the future, pay special attention to that point, because it's something I hadn't really thought about. And it's great that we have a resource for coordinating that. So yeah, so in conclusion, thanks again to all of you for coming out here. You know, I think that all of our panelists would probably be willing to be contacted. Danielle indicated that she's willing to share her incredibly awesome table, which I'm definitely going to take a look at more closely after this. And yeah, so thanks everyone, and have a great close of your semester, and a great holiday.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.